Unnatiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Ram Ram Hare Hare. Jai Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtatarashata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Abhay Charanaravind Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtatarashata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samaveta Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. Jainitai Gaur Premanande. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, Creation of the Universal Form, text number 31. Bahubhyo vartata kshatram. Bahubhyo vartata kshatram. Kshatriyastad anuvrataha. Kshatriyastad anuvrataha. Yojatastrayate varnan. Yojatastrayate varnan. Paurusha kantakakshatat. Paurusha kantakakshatat. Bahubhyo vartata kshatram. Kshatriyastadanuvrataha. Yojatastrayate varnan. Paurusha kantakakshatat. Bahubhyo vartata kshatram. Kshatriyastadanuvrataha. Yojatastrayate varnan. Paurusha kantakakshatat. Bahubhyah, from the arms of Vartata, generated. Kshatram, the power of protection. Kshatriyaha, in relation to the power of protection. Tat, that. Anuvrataha, followers. Yaha, one who. Jataha, so becomes. Trayate, delivers. Varanan, the other occupations. Paurushaha, representative of the personality of Godhead. Kantaka, of disturbing elements like thieves and debauchees. Kshatat, from the mischief. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: Thereafter the power of protection was generated from the arms of the gigantic Virat form, and in relation to such power, the Kshatriyas also came into existence by following the Kshatriya principle of protecting society from the disturbance of thieves and miscreants. Purport: As the Brahmanas are recognized by their particular qualification of inclination towards the transcendental knowledge of Vedic wisdom, so also the Kshatriyas are recognized by the power to protect society from the disturbing elements of thieves and miscreants. The word anuvrataha is significant. A person who follows the Kshatriya principles by protecting society from thieves and miscreants is called a Kshatriya. Not the one who is simply born a Kshatriya. The conception of the caste system is always based on quality and not on the qualification of birth. Birth is an extraneous consideration. It is not the main feature of the orders and divisions. In Bhagavad Gita 18.41-44, the qualifications of the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras are specifically mentioned, and it is understood that all such qualifications are needed before one can be designated as belonging to a particular group. Lord Vishnu is always mentioned as the Purusha in all Vedic scriptures. Sometimes the living entities are also mentioned as Purushas, although they are essentially Purusha Shakti, Parashakti or Paraprakriti. The superior energy of the Purusha, illusioned by the external potency of the Purusha, the Lord, the living entities falsely think of themselves as the Purusha, although they actually have no qualifications. The Lord has the power to protect. Of the three deities, Brahma, Vishnu and Maheshwara, the first has the power to create, the second has the power to protect, and the third has the power to destroy. The word Purusha is significant in this verse because the Kshatriyas are expected to represent the Purusha Lord in giving protection to the Prajas, or all those who are born in the land and water. Protection is therefore meant for both man and the animals. In modern society, the Prajas are not protected from the hands of thieves and miscreants. The modern democratic state, which has no Kshatriyas, is a government of the Vaishyas and Shudras, and not of Brahmanas and Kshatriyas as formerly. Maharaj Yudhishthira and his grandson Maharaj Parikshit were typical Kshatriya kings, for they gave protection to all men and animals. When the personification of Kali attempted to kill a cow, Maharaj Parikshit at once prepared himself to kill the miscreant, and the personification of Kali was banished from his kingdom. That is the sign of Purusha, or the representative of Lord Vishnu. According to Vedic civilization, a qualified Kshatriya, monarch, is given the respect of the Lord because he represents the Lord by giving protection to the Prajas. Modern elected presidents cannot even give protection from theft cases, and therefore one has to take protection from an insurance company. The problems of modern human society are due to the lack of qualified Brahmanas and Kshatriyas and the over-influence of the Vaishyas and Shudras by so-called general franchise. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Utapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapte Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Vancha Kalpaturubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so initially the Virat Purusha was producing the elements, the objects of the senses, and the demigods responsible for the Gyanendriyas and the Karmendriyas. And then after that, the three guna avatars, Brahma and Vishnu is already there, the Lord Shiva, along with the false ego, he controls the false ego. So they were created. The materialistic false ego, the gigantic form, separately manifested in itself, and therein entered Rudra. So then the guna avatars, so first it was the demigods that entered the various different positions, and then came the guna avatars, so the principal demigods, Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma. They entered into the form of the Virat Purusha. And then after that, now we're seeing how Krishna, he's organizing things in such a way that now the living entities can take facility of these different things which the Mahatattva was providing, like the elements and the senses and stuff like that, and the help of the demigods, so that they can live a proper life within society for the purpose of liberation. Right? So it's a dharma, artha, kama, moksha. So Varnashram system is that system by which society can at least think of mukti, can at least attain mukti, liberation from this material world. But as it says in the Vishnu Puran, Vishnu aradhyate, Varnashrama vata purushena parapuman, Vishnu aradhyate panta nanyat tattosha karanat. So the whole purpose of the Varnashram system is the satisfaction of Lord Vishnu. So people engage according to their nature that they have acquired. And Srila Prabhupada generally says that the Brahmanas are in the mode of goodness, the Kshatriyas are in the mode of passion, the Vaishyas are in the mode of passion and ignorance, and the Shudras in the mode of ignorance. Sridhar Swami says something slightly different. He says that the Kshatriyas are actually in the mixed mode of passion and goodness as well. So Kshatriyas have a tendency to be in the mode of goodness as well, because they need to strategize, they need to think. And you'll see not only in Vedic society, but in ancient societies like in Greece, in Rome and stuff like that, the kings actually took counsel from Brahminical people. And these Brahmanas were usually older men who were said to have more wisdom, and they used to guide society. So we see the same thing happening at the beginning of the creation as well. So passion means that you want to create, you want to do things, you want to, perform activities. But then to perform activities in the proper way, so that your activities will lead you eventually to moksha, you need to be guided by someone in the mode of goodness. Okay, if you're an individual, that can be your own mind, or in the case of Brahma, It was Krishna himself, right? Brahma is the deity who is controlling the mode of passion. And he is also slightly influenced by passion as well. And therefore he's in charge of creating. So he's doing the work of the Kshatriyas as well, because they create, they establish. So Brahma was initially guided by Lord Vishnu, Lord Krishna, who is in the mode of, not just the mode of goodness, but the mode of transcendental goodness, or Vasudev Sattva. So we see that original governance of the universe in that meeting between Lord Krishna and Lord Brahma. So Krishna, being in the mode of transcendental goodness, is advising Brahma how to create this, and to a certain degree to maintain as well this material universe. Because whenever there's a problem within this universe, then the demigods actually go to Brahma, and Brahma actually performs that activity of maintaining the demigods and the universal situation by approaching Lord Vishnu. So in that sense, although it's Lord Vishnu who is in charge of maintaining and protecting, as it's mentioned in the purports, Lord Brahma also plays a part by actually approaching Lord Vishnu to facilitate that protection of the demigods. I was reading something interesting yesterday. I was reading Vaishnava K. What kind of Vaishnava are you? So just started reading that. This is originally written by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, this Bengali poem. And Jayapataka Maharaj, actually, he's actually given his purports and his realizations, and also quotations by Srila Prabhupada from various books that he has. So anyway, there was a part there in that book, I think it was in the introduction, in the first verse, where Maharaj was actually saying that when it comes to devotional service, we have to engage not just the physical body, but our mind as well. He says the physical body is a mechanical instrument. The mind also is a mechanical instrument as well. The physical body is governed by certain laws and it works in certain ways, right? The blood is pumped through the arteries in a certain direction. It's not like you can just reverse the direction of the blood flow. It doesn't happen like that. So it's a system. There's rules. So the physical body is a mechanical system, and that's mentioned by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita when he says that it's a yantra. It's a machine. Machine means it acts according to certain laws and principles from which it was originally set up by the person who designed the machine. So in the same way, Maharaj was saying that our mind is also a machine as well. The only difference is that it's a subtle machine, whereas the physical body is a gross machine. That's it. But the mind also works in a certain way. Now, he was saying that it's very easy for us to engage our physical body in devotional service. But if we actually want to gain the perfection of devotional service, we also have to engage the material body, the subtle body in devotional service as well. So, we may constantly be doing service for Krishna, like, for example, chanting. So we've probably all been through the experience of just chanting our rounds on japa, but our mind will be somewhere else. So in that sense, it's easier to engage the physical body in devotional service, but it's harder to engage the subtle body in devotional service. But the real perfection of devotional service happens when our mind is constantly 24 hours a day engaged in devotional service. Because our physical body engaging in devotional service is just a ramification of our mind. If our mind is naturally thinking of Krishna, then our physical body will conduct Krishna conscious activities. So the real test of Krishna consciousness is, it's mentioned in the 11th canto, is how much detached we are from material sense gratification and how much enthusiastic we are to preach Krishna consciousness. These are the two benchmarks which is given for our advancement in Krishna consciousness. And Maharaj was explaining that, he was saying that Krishna, he doesn't see so much what you're doing for him on the physical platform, although that is important as well. But he's more interested in the mindset of a devotee. And he quotes an example which Srila Prabhupada has used to give. And that's the example of the physician's knife. I think this is also a story by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as well. The physician's knife. And Srila Prabhupada is mentioning that both the thief or the murderer he wields a knife, and the surgeon, he also wields a knife as well. And both of them perform the same activity of cutting someone's, right? Cutting someone's body. Right? The thief or the murderer, he might stab someone because he's attempting to steal something, so he wants to do away with people who are going to stop him or be an obstacle in his path. So he also, puts the knife into someone's body. And the surgeon is also doing the same thing. But Maharaj explains that the surgeon is awarded a lofty remuneration, a pay package for putting a knife into someone, whereas the murderer or the thief is actually thrown into jail. So the physical activity is the same, but the result is completely different. So why is that? Because the consciousness or the mentality of both people are different. The surgeon is putting the knife into someone's body in an attempt to help them, to recover them. But the thief is doing it for the wrong reasons, for his own sense gratification. So in the same way, two devotees might be doing exactly the same service, but depending on the consciousness of the devotee, the results that Krishna gives in terms of realizations, in terms of advancement in Krishna consciousness or whatever, can be completely different. So in the same way, we can apply that principle to Kshatriyas, because Kshatriyas are also protecting the citizens by through violence actually. They're committing violence. And thieves and rogues, because here it says in the verse that the Kshatriyas came into existence by following the Kshatriya principles of protecting society from the disturbance of thieves and miscreants. So thieves and miscreants also commit violence. Kshatriyas also commit violence as well. But the mentality of the Kshatriyas and the mentality of thieves and rogues is different. Again, same thing. The thieves and rogues are creating violence for their own purposes, whereas the Kshatriyas are committing violence for the peaceful situation of the society and the protection of their prajas. So the consciousness is important to note there. And Srila Prabhupada quotes in his Bhagavad Gita purports, he quotes, Kshatriyo hi praja rakshat. That the duty of a Kshatriya is to protect the prajas. And Srila Prabhupada makes the point that is the duty of the Kshatriya to protect the prajas on a physical platform. But more importantly, the biggest enemy that Bhagavad Gita explains of the conditioned soul is lust. Right? Kama esha, krodha esha, rajaguno samudbhava, mahashano mahapatma, vidyenam iha vairinam. This is the eternal enemy of the soul is the lust. And this lust, if it is unfulfilled, it later transforms into wrath and anger. And these three things actually, lust, anger, and also greed, they are the three gateways, Bhagavad Gita says, to hell. Right? And the relationship between lust, anger, and greed is both anger and greed come from lust, or they're related to lust, but the relationship is that unfulfilled lust leads to anger, and fulfilled lust, so-called fulfilled lust, leads to greed, to fulfill that lust again. Right? But Bhagavad Gita 3rd chapter explains, Dushpura analena cha. It explains that this lust is like a wildfire which cannot be satisfied. You may think, you may have material desires, you may think, let me just fulfill this one little desire and I'll be fulfilled. But just like we were giving the example of the itch last week, or maybe this week, the itch, so the more you scratch the itch, it'll come back more stronger. So the best way to deal with material desires is to not fulfill them, but instead to distract the mind or to divert the mind towards Krishna. My Guru Maharaj mentioned to me that he said, don't try to battle with your mind. When thoughts come into your mind, material thoughts come into your mind, desires come into your mind, when you're chanting japa, he said, don't fight with your mind. It's not possible. The mind is very strong. It's a very powerful energy of Krishna. Maya works heavily through the mind. And it says in the Bhagavad Gita that the lust, the eternal enemy of the soul, actually hides in three places: the intelligence, the mind, and one's senses. So our mind is a very formidable enemy. And Bhagavad Gita 6th chapter also explains that for one who has controlled the mind, conquered the mind, and the mind has become the friend by always naturally thinking of Krishna, then for such a person, the super soul is already reached, Krishna says. So such importance is given to all yoga systems, especially Bhakti Yoga, for controlling our mind. So the Kshatriyas are different from the thieves and rogues because they destroy lust within people, and they destroy thieves and rogues for a higher purpose, which is to protect society so that they can peacefully execute the Varnashram Dharma. And Srila Prabhupada starts the purport by explaining that when the head of society is not there, right, so not just Brahmanas but Kshatriyas as well, when there's no government or there's no king or something like that, then naturally what happens? Thieves and miscreants, they start to arise. And we find that amongst us. So like sometimes they conduct experiments on kids and how they behave and stuff. So, the parent will put a camera in a room, and then the parent will ask the child, this is a lolly jar right here, and this is actually meant for someone else, it's not meant for you, so don't touch this lolly jar, okay? So the parent walks outside of the room, and then he sees in the camera what the child's going to do. And the tendency is that if no one is watching us, then let me go and take the lollies, right? So in the same way, when the citizens, especially citizens, we can't expect all the citizens to be law-abiding and self-controlled. So when they see that there's no head of the government there, when the Brahmanas and Kshatriyas are not there, then naturally what happens is that thieves and rogues, they start to come out as well. And just on that point of, someone not being there and then us committing sinful activity, I was watching a little short, long time ago, I was watching a little short drama of a group of devotees in ISKCON that they made. And the drama, it showed it was a Gurukul scene, and the Guru was there, and then there was 4 or 5 students there. And the Guru asked the students just to test them about their knowledge of Shastra and their faith in God. He asked his students, so I'm going to give you this banana. And he gave a banana to each one of the students. And he said, go to a very secluded place, and I want you to eat this banana so that no one sees you. Right? So the students, they ran off with the banana to different places, and one person, he went right into the deep depths of the forest, and he looked around, and no one is here, no human beings are here, no animals are watching me, and then he started eating his banana. And then he thought he was successful. And another guy, another student, he actually went into the river, and then he, put his head under the river, and he held his nose, and he started eating the banana underneath the river. Yes, no one saw me. Like that, all the different students, they ate the banana, and they thought they were very successful and that their guru would be very pleased and happy with them. But then they all came back, the students came back, and the guru saw that all the students had eaten the banana except for one student. And so he asked that student, so how come you haven't eaten the banana yet? And the student replied that I went to so many different places, rivers, bushes, shrubs, forests, these different places, but there was nowhere, according to what you have taught me, Guru, there is nowhere in this creation where God is not watching me. So the Guru was very pleased, because this is what he wanted to teach his students. So that's the point. So the point is that when the devotee understands that Krishna is everywhere, and Krishna is always watching us as a Paramatma, then even if he's by himself or alone, he will still act in the proper way. So the devotee's achar and the prachar is exactly the same. What the devotees like in public life is exactly the same as how the devotees in private life. There's no duplicity in the devotees, because they know that Krishna is always there. The presence of Krishna is always there. So in the same way, within society, the presence of the Kshatriya ruler should always be there. And we see different instances in Shastra where that was a problem, like we see when King Anga, right? So he conducted a sacrifice because he was not begetting children. And he was actually married. His wife was actually the daughter of death personified. So she happened to come from a really inauspicious background. I think her name was Sunita. Suniti, Suruchi? Yeah, so for Dhruva Maharaj, his stepmothers were Suruchi and Suniti, But Maharaj Anga's wife was Sunita. So anyway, so the demigods came being appeased, the sacrifice, and then I think they gave some sweet rice to Sunita, and she ate it, and then Vena was born. King Vena, we know, the famous King Vena, who as a child was so malicious and devilish that he used to kill his playmates that he was playing with. Very horrible personality, actually. And it says that this is because Prabhupada mentions that the daughter takes on the qualities of her father and the son takes on the qualities of his mother. So therefore King Vena, going by that logic, took on the qualities of his grandfather, his maternal grandfather, who was death personified. So that's why King Vena was so abominable in his activities. So King Anga, what does he do? He thinks this is a good opportunity. My son is not listening to me. You know, what's the point? You know, if this person becomes a king, everything's going to go bad for society. Let me take this opportunity to renounce this world, this mature world, practice devotional service, and go back home, back to Goddess. So he runs away. And immediately the remaining Brahmanas in the society, they get very scared and upset. Because as soon as Maharaj Anga is there, gone, then the thieves and rogues in society, they started to come up as well. So what did they do? They had no option but to install King Vena. Even though he was too young and unqualified for the position, according to his guna and karma, still they had no option. They installed Vena on the throne. But instead of King Vena solving the problem of the thieves and rogues, what did he do? In this situation, what he did is he started to stop the Brahmanas in their advice to him. So he didn't take any advice from the Brahmanas. He stopped all the sacrifices in the kingdom, and he said everyone should glorify me, and he went about his own program. And because he was so absorbed in his own program, it says that the thieves and rogues in society, they were still coming up. And the situation was like that of an ant on a stick where the fire is burning from both sides. So King Vena did not solve the problem of thieves and rogues because he was unqualified. So that shows us that and like as Prabhupada is mentioning towards the end of the purport, that nowadays we have a government where it's being run by Vaishyas and Shudras. So because it's run by Vaishyas, the prime purpose of the government is to make sure that society is economically well off. And happiness means sense gratification and economic development. So as long as we're economically prospering, then that naturally means that the society is happy. But that's not the case. The real case is that happiness comes. Srila Prabhupada defines what Varnashram system is. He says it's a theocratic governance. Theocratic, he explains. Theocratic means that, as Yamaraj mentions in the 6th canto, he says to his followers, the Yamadutas, he says, Dharmam, what is it? Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. Dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. That dharma or religion is enunciated by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So, Krishna, being empowering Manu, because Manu is the representative of Krishna, right? He's a representative of Krishna. And then so he empowers Manu to create things like the Manu Samhita and the rules and regulations for human society. And then Manu in turn instructs all the kings, as we see in Bhagavad Gita, that is mentioned at the beginning of the 4th chapter, that the knowledge is transferred from Manu into the kings, like Ikshvaku. And when that is done, the king is supposed to take this knowledge, which is really coming from God, to govern society. So Varnashram system or Vedic culture is a theocratic society. So the king has to be qualified, and that's another important point Srila Prabhupada is making, that these qualifications which are mentioned in Bhagavad Gita from 18:4:1 to 4:4, like for Kshatras it's mentioned Shoryam Tejo Dhritir Daksham Yuddecha Palayanam Dhanam Ishvara Bhavascha Kshatram Karma Vibhagasha. Right? Shoryam means heroism. Tejo means power. Dhritir means determination. Daksham means resourcefulness.
They have to be resourceful. They have to be able to form diplomatic ties with other neighboring kings. They have to be able to extract taxes, to satisfy and maintain society. Yuddecha apalayanam. Yuddecha apalayanam means not fleeing from the battlefield. And that's something that Krishna sort of chastises Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, because Arjuna actually wanted to flee from the battlefield. And then Krishna started to give him reasons. Hato va prapsisi swargam jitva va bhokshase mayim. He says, if you fight this war and you win, then you'll get the unrivaled kingdom. If you don't win, if you die, then you'll go to the heavenly planets. In both cases, there's a win-win situation for you. And then he says that for a Kshatriya, if he flees away from the battlefield, which is actually not a quality of a Kshatriya, but if he flees away from the battlefield, then people will scorn at you and they'll ridicule you and they'll speak bad about you and you'll get infamy. And for a Kshatriya, such infamy is worse than death, Krishna says to Arjuna. So therefore you should fight. So but the thing is, so Yuddecha apalayam, and then Dhanam, a Kshatriya is supposed to give charity to the Brahmanas, and Ishvara Bhava. Usually Ishvara Bhava, or the mentality of controllership and lordship, it's considered to be a bad thing. But the Kshatriya employs that conditioning that he or she has of Ishvara Bhava to govern and to rule and to lord over other people. He uses that in Krishna's service, because here Srila Prabhupada is making the point of Purusha. And what is he saying about Purusha? He's saying actually Krishna or Lord Vishnu is the original Purusha. And the living entities are the Purusha Shakti, otherwise known as Para Shakti or Para Prakriti. Aparayam itastvanyam prakritim vidhi me param. Para Prakriti. But the Para Prakriti or the Para Shakti, the living entity, thinks or is acting in this material world as the Purusha, as the controller. But this is perfected, Srila Prabhupada says, this is perfected when the living entity uses that Purusha mentality for the satisfaction of Krishna and representing Krishna. Srila Prabhupada is mentioning that Vishnu, his role is to protect. So when the Kshatriya employs that Ishvara Bhava to protect society, he actually pleases Lord Vishnu by doing that. And Srila Prabhupada is giving the example of Parikshit Maharaj. So Parikshit Maharaj was going and he saw Kali, and he was doing all these abominable things, like he was hacking the leg of the bull, which represents Dharma. And the only leg left was truthfulness. So he actually took action. But at the same time, he did his duty as well. Because anyone who approaches a Kshatriya is supposed to give shelter. So he gave shelter to Kali in 4 places, where there is prostitution, where there is gambling, where there is animal killing, and where there is, what's the last one? Intoxication. Yeah, so gambling houses and then, bars and clubs where people get intoxicated. So these 4 places. And also, he gave him residence where gold is exploited. Gold is usurped. Because wherever there's gold, Srimad Bhagavatam explains there's hypocrisy. And there's no clarity, because people in this world, they want money, they want gold to enjoy sense gratification. So just to get that gold, they'll act in hypocritical ways, in ways which are duplicitous. So that's why Parikshit Maharaj allowed Kali to stay in places where gold and money is laundered. Right? So the Srimad Bhagavatam gives examples of many great Kshatriyas, and usually we hear the story of Maharaj Shibi. We know the story of Maharaj Shibi. I heard a interesting detail in that story, because usually when Srila Prabhupada quotes that story, it's explained that Maharaj Shibi was once there, he was seated in his assembly house, and then a dove comes flying into the room, and it comes straight into his lap, and it's really frantically, breathing, and it's scared. And it sees that the hawk is coming. And he says, the hawk says to Maharaj Shibi that, okay, now the bird has, the dove or the pigeon has taken shelter of you, so I can't take it, but then at the same time you should maintain me as well. So therefore, give me some sort of remuneration. And he says, I can give you the meat which is stocked in our warehouse. He said, no. I have to take it from your body. Fine, he says. So then Maharishi sets up a scale and he says, okay, I'll give you exactly how much meat is there, the weight of the pigeon, from my own body. So he starts to, from the right side of his body, he gets a knife and he starts to cut his thigh. And he puts, pound by pound, he starts to put his own flesh onto the scale. And he sees that the dove is actually still weighing more than no matter how much flesh he's putting onto the scale. And Srila Prabhupada explains that finally Maharishi, he climbs onto the scale himself. So he himself climbs onto the scale, and then the scale balances out. So that's one version of the story. But another version of the story, by a disciple of Satchinanda Maharishi was explaining, that what happens is the eagle, or the hawk, which is chasing the pigeon, he tells to Maharishi, he says that, you're cutting your flesh and I'll accept the flesh that you're giving me instead of the pigeon. But if you so much as to shed a tear because of lamentation and grief that you're cutting your own body, then I won't even accept the flesh that you're giving me. So Maharishi starts to cut his flesh and he starts to put it on. And it comes to a point where he almost cuts off all of the left side of his body, it's explained. And then still, the pigeon is still heavier. And then at that time, the hawk sees coming from Maharishi's eyes some tears. And the hawk says, just see, I'm not going to accept this offering of the left side of your body that you have given to me, because now you're shedding tears. So you're grief-stricken, I can't accept such charity, which is given in that condition. Because to give charity, the person who's giving charity, they have to be happy and satisfied to give the charity. Then Maharishi actually explains that, don't worry, I'm not crying out of grief, I'm not crying out of lamentation. The reason I'm crying is that I consider myself so fortunate that I can sacrifice my whole body to satisfy you. So these tears which are coming out of my eyes, they're actually tears of joy. So this was Maharishi's consciousness actually. So he thought that he wasn't lamenting that he had lost half of his body, but he thought, now I have the opportunity to satisfy my praja by giving my entire body. So in this way, when he says that, then the hawk and the pigeon, they transform themselves into Indra and Agni. So sometimes it said Indra and Agni, sometimes it said Indra and Dharmaraj, Yamaraj actually. But they profusely benedict Maharishi, and then he ascends to the throne actually, to the heavenly kingdom. I'll just go through something which I read in Ramayana. This is translated by Bhakti Vikas Maharaj. So, and this is pertaining to kings. So this is, I'll just find a page really quickly. Because what happens is, we know that Ram, Sita and Lakshman, they get banished. And Bharat is supposed to be enthroned onto the throne to rule Ayodhya. But then when Bharat comes back to Ayodhya, because he's actually, for some months, Bharat Maharaj and Shatrughna, because they're brothers, the sons of Kaikeyi, they're actually at their maternal grandfather's house, King Kekaya, his name is, because their mother is called Kaikeyi, so they're at King Kekaya's kingdom. So then they have no idea that Ram has been banished. So again, the same instance, that because there's no king left, because now Dashrath Maharaj has died, thieves and rogues are starting to come up in the kingdom. So the Brahmanas in Ayodhya instruct the messengers to hastily go to the kingdom of Kekaya and to retrieve Bharat Maharaj and Shatrughna back, so that they can be installed onto the throne, they can be coronated. So Bharat comes back and he's told about how his father has died and how Ram has been banished, and he becomes really upset. So what does Bharat do? He says that, okay, I'm not going to be installed, I'm going to actually go back into the forest and bring Ram back. So he actually sets off, with a huge army he sets off, and he goes through different places, like Bharadwaja's, Muni's ashram, and he finally comes to Chitrakoot, where at that point in time, Ram, Lakshman and Sita are based. And when he sees them, this is the discussion actually, coming forward to touch Rama's feet, Bharat suddenly fainted and fell to the ground. Rama quickly lifted him up and was disturbed to see that he was also wearing tree bark. So just as Ramachandra was wearing tree bark, Bharat Maharaj was also wearing tree bark as well, because he respected Ramachandra so much. After embracing Shatrugna, who had also fallen at his feet, Rama embraced Sumantra and Guha. So Guha was the king in the forest who had led Bharat Maharaj to Rama's encampment, because before coming to Chitrakoot, Ramachandra had actually stayed with King Guha for some time. Then Rama took Bharata on his lap and saying, "Dear brother, why have you come here, leaving our father alone and unattended? Tell me about our mothers and the citizens of Ayodhya. Are they all well and happy?" Now this is the important part, which relates to today's verse from Bhagavatam. Rama then inquired from Bharata in a way that was instructive to all present. "My dear Bharata, please know that a righteous kingdom will surely prosper. Are the Brahmanas, the elders, and the demigods being properly respected?" So these are the questions that Ramachandra is asking Bharata Maharaj, because he sees that he's upset. So he inquires about the kingdom. He inquires about, is it being run properly? And he says, are the Brahmanas, the elders, and the demigods being properly respected? So we see that in a society where the government respects the Brahmanas, people who are cultivating spiritual knowledge and distributing that spiritual knowledge in society. The elders, we see in today's society, elders are not so much respected. We don't see so many elderly people walking around in the community. Rather, we see that Srila Prabhupada mentions that when the parents get old, then the children, they put their parents into nursing homes. So in today's society, elders are not respected as well. And the demigods, are they being properly respected? Are the women within the kingdom honored and protected? Are disputes being impartially judged? I hope you are avoiding the 14 weaknesses of a king. So a king has 14 weaknesses: atheism, hypocrisy, anger, procrastination, laziness, slavery to the senses. So this particular one, slavery to the senses, is something we see in Sugriva. We see that when Sugriva, he takes back the throne, after Ramachandra, he shoots an arrow and he kills Vali. Then what happens to Sugriva? He just abounds in sense gratification. And he says for the 4 months of Chaturmasya, he's just enjoying with his wife, and he's enjoying liquor and alcohol and so many things. So even though he's the king of all these monkeys, he just allows sense gratification, becomes a slave to the senses. So much so that Hanuman has to come and advise him, and Lakshman actually comes in a very angry mood. He comes to their kingdom, Sugriva's kingdom, and he chastises Sugriva. You're supposed to be helping Lord Ramachandra to find Sita Devi, but here you are, just a slave to your senses. So a king that's one of the weaknesses of a king. Contempt for good advice. So king should always seek the good advice of the Brahmanas, not like King Vena. Lack of vigilance, fondness for bad counsel, impractical planning, inability to keep a secret, attachment for foolish friends, negligence of religious observances, and failure to counteract enemies. And then Ramachandra goes on to say, do you avoid the following 4 types of company: the gossipy, the foul-mouthed, the usurper of property, and the unjust? Do you avoid making alliances with these 16 kings? So a king also makes alliances with others, right? To expand his kingdom, to make his kingdom stronger. He creates alliances and allies. He has allies. But a king, according to Vedic culture, according to Lord Ramachandra, should not make alliances with these types of kings. The child monarch, so one who is too young and therefore uneducated and inexperienced. The senile, the frail and ill, those who have been overthrown, the overly aggressive kings, the cowardly kings, the greedy and sensualist kings, the frivolous kings, those who are defeated in battle. Like we see in the case of Rukmi, right? Rukmi gets defeated by Krishna as he's giving chase to get Rukmini back. And then after he's defeated, what happens? Krishna Balaram come and they cut off his hair, and they humiliate him. Then what does Rukmi do? Being defeated in battle, he says, I can't go back to my kingdom now. So then he constructs his own kingdom, staying in that place. So those who are defeated in battle, one should not make alliances with. Those who frequently travel about, those with many enemies, those who are poverty-stricken, those opposed to religious principles, those who are despised by their ministers, and the mentally disturbed. I'll just finish with one quick story. Sriman Nrsimha Prabhu was recently explaining to us that the beanies that we wear, they're actually our worst enemies, because he was explaining that when one pays obeisances, the dust which collects on the forehead after paying obeisances, if one puts that dust away by, with the hand or something like that, or in case if you're wearing a beanie, then the dust doesn't even collect on your forehead, right? Because the beanie stops from doing that. So he was explaining that as the dust after paying obeisances, if you brush it aside, if it falls to the floor, then one will face a very hellish situation. One goes to hell for as many years as the particles of dust in the forehead, they're brushed aside from one's forehead after one pays obeisances. So we know the Prabhupada quotes King Kulashekar. So this is a story. So that what Prabhu was saying, that actually comes from this story. It's a story of King Kulashekar. So what happens is one day King Kulashekar, he's in his assembly, royal assembly, as a great king, principal Vedic monarch, following all the rules and regulations. All the citizens are happy with him, and he's listening to Harikatha. And he's listening to Harikatha with all the soldiers and all the other ministers, and everyone is there assembled. And he's very much absorbed. And then all of a sudden his Guru Maharaj, he comes into the assembly. So then what does King Kulashekar do? He gets off his royal throne, off the dais, and he goes and he falls at his Guru's feet. Right? He pays Dandavat Pranams to his Guru. And then some dust happens to collect on Kulashekar's forehead. So then what happens? The Guru, he goes back to his seat, he's given a seat, and King Kulashekar goes back to his throne, and everyone starts hearing Harikatha. Now, as the story goes, a fly actually comes, and it starts to buzz around King Kulashekar's forehead. So because the fly is annoying, what does King Kulashekar do? He actually flicks it away. But in the process of flicking the fly away, he actually brushes against his forehead. So all the particles of dust which had accumulated on his forehead after paying obeisance to his Guru actually fall down. And his Guru was actually very observant, very vigilant. And he sees what his disciple has done. And not out of pride or something, but just to teach his disciple a lesson, the Guru, he actually looks down in disgust to teach his disciple a lesson. He looks down. And the king sees that my Guru is sad. He looks dissatisfied. So he asks his Guru, what happened? Why are you, we're hearing Harikatha. Why are you so dissatisfied? He says, after paying obeisances to me, transcendental dust had collected on your forehead, but then now you've just flicked that dust away and it's fallen to the ground. Don't you know that for as many particles of dust which fall to the floor, after paying obeisances, that many years one has to spend in a hellish condition. So I feel very sad and unfortunate knowing the situation that awaits you. And King Kulashekar, he became really disturbed, agitated, and anxious. His Guru Maharaj leaves the assembly. And then he starts running around asking his ministers, his brahmanas, what is the cure for offending the Guru in this way? What is the cure for flicking away the particles of dust on our forehead after paying obeisances? And the brahmanas, they go and they